Kansas is recognized. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise today to honor the life and legacy of Kelsey Ann Smith of Overland Park, Kansas. I rise today on behalf of Kelsey's Army, people all across the country who have put themselves in the shoes of Greg and Missy Smith, who have also had children that have been abducted, who understand that we need common sense public safety laws like this on the books to ensure that we can save lives and ensure that these types of abductions and murders never happen again in our country without our ability to stop them as quickly as possible. June 6, 2016 will mark 9 years since Kelsey Smith, an 18-year-old Shawnee Mission West student, was kidnapped in broad daylight from a Target parking lot by a predator who would sexually assault and murder her soon after. I remember it like it was yesterday. We all in Kansas and in my community felt immediately associated with the grief and pain that Kelsey's parents were feeling. Parents worried about their own children. They understood what was happening, and they wanted to help. And so Kansans and people in my community helped search for Kelsey for days. And as my chairman, Mr. Walden, so eloquently spoke in favor of this bill, it is an anguish to have your child be missing and cannot do anything about it. Kelsey's mother, Missy, says that when your child is missing, as a parent, you don't eat. As a parent, you don't sleep because you don't know if your child is eating or sleeping. I'm a father of 2 little girls. I cannot imagine the pain and suffering Missy and her husband, Greg, who are with us here today, have endured from Kelsey's loss. No parent should have to. And so today we're going to hear different debates and arguments about how the bill could be changed or improved or differences could be made. But the reality is this law is not on the books in 28 states, and those children are not protected. And we cannot, as a House, allow this to stand. And so I ask my colleagues to dig deep in their heart, to think about putting themselves in their shoes, and to not block this legislation, to let this legislation come forward. I promise you it's popular in your district. I promise you a majority of Americans will support this. And opposing this bill is simply wrong and shameful. In the 9 years since Greg and Missy's daughter was taken from them, they've dealt with this unspeakable, horrific experience with grace and determination. Rather than falling into the depths of despair like anyone can imagine them to do, they've channeled their grief into the passion to help others find themselves in Kelsey's situation. They've traveled the United States fighting to pass state-level versions of the bill we are considering today, and they have done so with great success, with 23 states having passed a version of the Kelsey Smith Act. Today, this body will have the chance to honor Kelsey's memory and Greg and Missy's tireless advocacy by bringing the law to all 50 states. In the words of Missy Smith, we have the rare opportunity to save lives without it costing 1 cent. The Kelsey Smith Act creates a narrow exception for law enforcement officers to gain access to limited call location information of an individual's cell phone in the event of an emergency like a kidnapping. In those cases, every second counts. Unfortunately, in Kelsey's case, it took 4 excruciating days for law enforcement to finally obtain the location data from her cell provider. 4 days while an entire community searched for Kelsey with no success. It took 4 days because under current law, providers are not required to provide location data. They're permitted to in an emergency situation, but it's up to their discretion. So the question for this body is, do you want to leave this up to a cell phone provider, for the lawyers and the executives there to decide, or do you want trained law enforcement making this decision based upon a reasonable belief of an exigent emergency circumstance? And it's analogous. I mean, I think we all would agree. I think my folks on the opposite side of the aisle would agree that there's certainly a Fourth Amendment right to protect your home and your dwelling, probably the greatest Fourth Amendment protection right of all. And yet, if an officer was driving by and saw an exigent circumstance, saw someone who is in jeopardy of physical harm or emergency, they have the ability to break into that home to save that life. This information is even less secure. It's much more in the public domain. A cell phone provider already has the right to release it. We're saying that decision should be made by law enforcement. And it breaks my heart every time I recount Kelsey's story. When finally handed over her cell phone location information, police found Kelsey's body within 45 minutes. A search that floundered for 4 days could have ended in 45 minutes. And we know for a fact, as Chairman Walden articulated, that other lives have already been saved in states that have adopted this law. Mr. Speaker, a federal framework is needed to save lives across the entire country, not just in a patchwork of states who have adopted this bill. It's up to this body to set that framework, which would be a ceiling for state legislatures to follow. If certain states feel that additional privacy protections, such as suggested by my colleagues across the aisle, must be put into place, they are well within their jurisdiction to do so. But I believe any concerns articulated by others are overblown in this situation. As someone who has spent my career in this body fighting for the privacy rights, we just passed the Email Privacy Act 419 to nothing, and all of us supported that. To modernize our Fourth Amendment rights with regard to email privacy, I feel comfortable in saying this bill strikes the right balance. It does not give you the information on the phone. It does not give you content. It does not give you anything other than the pings on the phone in the case of an emergency. It doesn't even give you GPS tracking. It does not infringe upon our constitutional rights, and any of us as parents would be thankful that we voted for this bill today should something horrific happen in our lives. Mr. Speaker, this body often debates the merits of protecting Americans from the threat of harm versus giving up certain civil liberties. In this case, we are blessed with modern technology that affords law enforcement with a tool to save lives without Americans giving up any of their privacy. Now, I'd like to thank my predecessor, Representative Dennis Moore, and my former colleague, Todd Tiahrt of Kansas, who began this effort shortly after Kelsey's death. I would also like to thank Representatives Lynn Jenkins, Mike Pompeo of Kansas, my colleague from across the aisle, Emmanuel Cleaver of Missouri, who have worked with me in this fight. I would also like to thank Chairman Upton and Chairman Walden for working swiftly over the last month to move this important legislation forward. But most of all, I would like to thank the two most important people in this room who have advocated for this bill day after day, Greg and Missy Smith. But for their support and guidance, for their ability to share the tragedy with the world and channel it into goodness, for being here today and throughout their entire legislative process, we would have moved this bill forward. This moment would be possible. So God bless you, Greg and Missy, and God bless Kelsey. Mr. Speaker, I urge my colleagues to support this bill's passage today. I strongly urge the Senate to waste no time in following suit. Let's send Kelsey's law to the President's desk this year for his signature so we can do something truly meaningful in a bipartisan way and so we can save lives. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman from